Howdy. So, esports, professional video gaming. It's been a thing since video games themselves have been a thing, and it makes sense since people are just naturally competitive and want to know that they're the best at something. And nowadays it's seen as a legitimate career that you can make a decent living from, but for a while there, people who did esports were genuinely viewed like this.
Get a job!
Things are very different now, with esports athletes being treated with far greater respect than ever before, so I decided to wind the clock back a little bit and take a brief look at the history of esports as of this video. History began at Stanford University on October 19, 1972. The college just received the recent PDP-10 computer for use in research and engineering. However, some of the young students who were working with the computer weren't using it for research purposes. Instead, they were playing a little game called Space War. See, for about a decade up to that point, the game Space War was being passed around to anyone with a computer capable of running it. Some would just simply play the game, but others would reverse engineer the game and add a few new features, such as a sun with gravitational pull, hyperspace, and the ability to go invisible, just to name a few examples. The gameplay of Space War is a dogfight between two rocket ships, with the obvious goal being to shoot down the enemy ship. You can rotate the ship clockwise or counterclockwise, move forward with the thrusters, and fire a small projectile. Though the version at Stanford University was by far the most sophisticated. Programmed by Ralph Gorin, who would later go on to create the first spell checker, this version of the game added space mines, partial damage,
Neat.
and playing with 5 people simultaneously.
Whoa, fuck!
On top of that, this version of Space War also allowed people to spectate the game. Around this time, a man by the name of Stuart Brand was at Stanford writing an article for the magazine Rolling Stone about how computers could be used to benefit society, and he found that video games were the most fascinating thing about them. Brand had seen and played Space War before when he went to other universities and research stations, but it was the version developed at Stanford that gave him the idea for a tournament. So, after convincing the executive officer to shut down the lab for an evening, the first intergalactic Space War Olympics would be held. And to get people to show up, there would be the college essentials. Beer.
Well, screw my GPA.
The competition went down like this. There was a free-for-all and a team fight. The last man or team standing was the winner. The winner was given a free year-long subscription to the magazine Rolling Thunder, and, according to this article, the real prize was the bragging rights that would come after being named the Intergalactic Space War Champion of 1972. I
put that quote into Google and it redirected me to Tinder.
This little competition was pretty successful at the university, but it had limited appeal. Most people didn't know what video games were, let alone that they existed. Hell, the first polling machine wouldn't be installed until 6 weeks after the competition took place, and the few people who did show up were either engineering students who had already known what the video game was, or students who showed up because there was beer. While this is widely accepted to be the first esports competition, the first true esports event wouldn't happen for another decade. But before we can talk about that, we have to talk about
Space Invaders!
The first blockbuster video game. Back when Space Invaders first released in 1978, it quickly garnered a lot of popularity from gamers for being a fun and addicting game, with 300,000 arcade machines being purchased back in the game's heyday. During this time, the Atari 2600 was doing relatively okay. It hadn't yet become the success it was going to be, but that all changed when Space Invaders was ported to the system in 1980. With the release of Space Invaders, the Atari 2600 sales skyrocketed. Just the idea of being able to play Space Invaders in the comfort of your own home was very appealing to a lot of consumers. So with their newfound success, Atari thought, hey, why not capitalize on this popularity? So in 1980, Atari decided to hold a competition to see who could get the highest score in Space Invaders. This would become the first true esports event. The tournament went down like this. There were 4 regional competitions, and once there were 4 winners decided, they would all go to New York to compete against each other in the finals.
On the surface, it doesn't really seem like it had very much to it, but this was the first large-scale esports event attracting more than 10,000 people. That got a lot of introverts out of their parents' basement.
A few years later, in 1983, the Video Game Masters Tournament was created through the joint efforts of the US National Video Game Team and Twin Galaxies. The competition was established specifically for getting scores for the Guinness Book of World Records to use. It went on yearly from 1983 to 1987. Now, with platforms like Twitch and YouTube, events like esports can be streamed and watched from the comfort of your couch or toilet, but what would be the precursor to this? Why, a televised game show, of course! Finally, the generational gap's been breached. This is Starcade, a game show all about video games. It aired from 1982 to 1984, and it featured people competing against each other in the latest and greatest arcade games, and even had them answering a few video game related questions, also they could win some sweet prizes. Starcade was unique, but uniqueness doesn't always guarantee popularity. I mean, just look at Moon Shoes. For what it was okay, nothing too stellar, but it was something fun to watch for kids who were into video games. But what if you wanted to play video games with your friends, but you're a lazy, lonely, depressed college kid who doesn't want to leave the comfort of their own bed? Well, Nettrek's got you covered. It's Space War on the internet! Released in 1988, Nettrek is an online multiplayer video game for the PC. It's a hybrid between multi-directional shooters and real-time strategy games, and it's loosely based on the universe of Star Trek.
To boldly go where no virgin has gone before.
It's a 16-player game with typically 2 teams of 8. There are 40 planets on the map, the goal being to capture enemy planets by bringing armies from your friendly planets over or by bombing them so you can
take over the world.
The team to successfully capture all the planets is the winner. Nettrek was the third internet game. It pioneered many of the technologies used in later games, and it was one of the oldest examples of the MOBA subgenre. It's also still played to this day.
The esports events of the 80s laid the groundwork for how an event like this should take place, but when the 90s rolled around, that's when esports events started getting really good.
Street Fighter 2. You ever heard of it? It was pretty good. It was a fighting game released in 1991, and then it got an updated version with refined gameplay and more characters to play as, and then it got another update, and another, 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 and another.
Just release the third fucking game already!
Since video games' inception, competitive players have always been a thing. People like knowing that they're the best at something. But with the release of Street Fighter 2, competitive players finally had the perfect game to compete against their friends with, and this led to the creation of EVO. Of course, there were other games where players fought against each other, like Combat, Pong, Warlords, and of course there were the precursors of Street Fighter 2, like the original Street Fighter and Sega's own Heavyweight Champ. However, these original fighting games weren't very fun to play, they were very clunky. But Street Fighter 2 managed to make that gameplay fluid and fun, which gave it a much wider appeal. The first EVO event was held in 1996, where it was called Battle by the Bay for its first outing. It featured 2 fighting games, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Street Fighter Alpha 2. The tournament used a double elimination format, which became the standard ever since. However, this was the only event to be held in the 90s. EVO wouldn't reappear until the year 2000, and it has gone on annually ever since, with the name officially being changed to Evolution in 2002. But there was one big event that happened during the 90s, 6 years before EVO. Beginning on March 8, 1990, in Dallas, Texas, the Nintendo World Championships toured across 29 US cities and ended after 3 days. The competition was split into 3 different age groups, 11 and under, 12 to 17, and 18 and over. The way to win was simple, just rack out the points in the NES game given to you. The winner would be crowned city champion and was given $250 US, a trophy, and tickets to Universal Studios Hollywood in Los Angeles, California, so they could compete in the finals. The finals were held from December 7th to the 9th, with every finalist playing a special NWC cart that had a modified version of Super Mario Bros., Rad Racer, and Tetris for up to 6 minutes, with the goal being to rack up as many points as possible. Each game had a multiplier, with Mario being by 1, Rad Racer being by 10, and Tetris being by 25.
This will be on the test.
The 3 winners were Thor Ackerland, Jeff Hansen, and Drew Danson. The Nintendo World Championships is one of the most memorable esports events in history, and that's mainly thanks to its spectacle. It toured across 29 US cities and had good advertising, giving it a long-lasting impression. Not to mention, it's the reason why one of the most valuable NES games even exists. Every finalist was given an NWC cart that was used in the competition. The cart itself is unique for having 4 small switches right on the front. When flipped, these increase or decrease the time you'd have to complete the challenge. There's also a Go variety given away in a Nintendo Power contest. These are even more rare and valuable than the normal gray NWC cart. The NWC 1990 wasn't Nintendo's only event. They also had an event in 1991 at 58 different college campuses called the Nintendo Campus Challenge.
Well, fuck my GPA.
The NCC had a similar structure to the NWC, but also different. There was no splitting of age groups since everyone at college was typically close to the same age anyway. Instead, it was split apart into 3 different stages. The main stage held 12 different game stations used for the competition and allowed attendees to play as many times as they wanted in order to achieve the highest score. The second and third stages had NES and Game Boy systems where attendees could demo some upcoming games. At the end of the day, the player with the highest score won the competition and would be later flown out to Disney World in Orlando, Florida to compete in the finals. Much like the NWC, the NCC used a special cart that housed 3 games inside. Those games are Mario 3, Pinbot, and Dr. Mario. Mario 3 was multiplied by 10, Pinbot was just your score, and Dr. Mario was by 100. The overall winner was Stephen Lucas. The very next year, the NCC struck again, but this time it was only held at 35 college campuses and focused on the newly released Super Nintendo. What was par for the course with Nintendo Championships at this point, the NCC 1992 also had a game compilation made specifically for it. This thick cart included Super Mario World, F-Zero, and Pilotwings, with Mario World's score being multiplied by 1, F-Zero by 100, and Pilotwings by 10,000. The final Nintendo competition to be held in the 1990s was PowerFest 94, otherwise known by fans as the Nintendo World Championships 2. Its structure was different from the NWC and NCC, with the competition taking place across several cities inside special trailers with the PowerFest cart inside. The games on it being Mario The Lost Levels, where you just gotta beat the first level, Super Mario Kart, just finish the 5 laps on the first track, and finally Ken Jeffrey Jr. presents Major League Baseball, where you just gotta hit as many home runs as possible. The Lost Levels multiply your score by 1, Mario Kart multiplied your coin total by 1000 and added your position score, and Ken Jeffrey multiplied your total distance by 100 and your total home runs by 1 million.
Are you even taking notes?
The finalists were taken to San Diego, California, where they were split up into 4 teams: the Cyclones, Hurricanes, Tornadoes, and Typhoons. The Tornadoes absolutely reigned supreme, and a tiebreaker was held using the Donkey Kong competition card to crown the ultimate winner, with Michael LaRosie taking victory. The internet had developed quite a bit since NetShark was released in the 1980s, and video games started taking advantage of the connectivity it offered. Tournaments like the Cyber Athlete Professional League were held in 1997, including games like Counter-Strike, Quake, and even Warcraft. The CBL continued annually until 2013. Esports have been kicking around for a few decades now, with some events big and small, and their popularity stayed about the same in the early 2000s. See, their main problem was that it was boring to watch for anyone that wasn't a competitor, since they couldn't see the games being played. However, when the 2010s came around, that's when esports entered a huge renaissance. This was around the time when live streaming services like Twitch started to gain some traction. They allowed hundreds of people to watch someone just do stuff, with the most popular being video games. See, live streaming video games could bring in thousands of viewers and make streamers with sponsorships earn 1 cent or $1 per viewer, which equates to between $1,000 to $10,000. But live streaming made some companies realize that if you can show people gameplay in real time, then they may very well pay good money to go to big special events similar to baseball or football. And that's exactly what they did! Companies would invest millions for advertising, sponsorships, and media rights for competitive video games like Dota 2 and Overwatch. Stadiums would be packed to the brim with hundreds of thousands of people, with millions more tuning in on YouTube and Twitch just to watch. Just recently, EVO had an event in 2019 featuring all sorts of fighting games like Tekken 7, Soul Calibur, Under the Night, and Birth EXE, among many others, and it even had a side event focusing strictly on Melee.
Alright, Melee!
I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about the Smash scene in esports. So, Smash-related events started popping up in 2002, where people would obviously compete to see who's the best of the best, but out of all the Smash games, Melee was special. Because of how Melee was coded, it allowed players to use special techniques that gave them the edge in a fight, like wave dashing, shuffling, and smashed AI, among many others. Pros basically utilized glitches in the game's code so they could do some crazy stuff in a match. Just watch.
I never think that I will beat you in Falcon Dittos.
That's a promise. Please remind 70-year-old Scar that 70-year-old
I definitely need to set a phone reminder in 40 years.
Oh!
Get him, Ken!
That was
Competitive Melee is really great to watch, and if you somehow haven't seen it up to this point, then I can't recommend it enough.
Esports have come a long way since their initial debut alongside video games, and it never really caught on until the early 2010s, mainly due to technological limitations, but now it's seen as an actual legitimate career that you can make a decent living from. Which goes against everything that my mom said to me as a kid. Oh, stop wishing you could play video games as a career, just follow my footsteps and become a therapist. Oh yeah, Mom? Well, look where video games are now. Not only am I going to become a legit esports athlete, but I'm going to do it in the fighting game scene. And just how do I plan on getting good, you might ask? Well, it's quite simple. Much like other professional sports, I can hire a pro to come in and show me the ropes and put me down the path to become a professional myself. My first session starts in an hour.
Oh my fucking god! Corner circle! God fucking damn it! Keyframes! Keyframes! What's the f***ing keyframes? No! Fucking worthless. How are you this f***ing bad? The game is literally set to practice mode. It's literally, the AI is dumb as shit. And you're still f***ing this up. Hand me your controller.
Mom, I need emotional support.